it's nice when people who really know you introduce you. That way you don't get a lot of fluff. That's good. Thank you, Barry. I love you and appreciate you. I've had a long relationship with this congregation, from being not only a guest speaker, but I partner with your elders in providing counseling services for you. Now, that's not always advertised, but if you're a member at this congregation and you need somebody to talk to about something, I'm available. All you have to do is email me or call me, and you don't pay any out-of-pocket expenses, and it's unlimited how often you can come or whatever. So if you're in need of either somebody to listen to you, somebody to help you sort through things, or just in general, hey, I just want to make sure I'm doing okay. The elders have provided that through me for a number of years, and because of that partnership, it allows me to donate my time to other things. I couldn't do my police work without the support of the elders here. I couldn't speak at the schools I speak at without the support of the elders here. And so not only are they partnering with taking care of your needs, but they're also ministering to the community by allowing me some of that freedom. And I don't always get to express that to your shepherds, but I do dearly appreciate it, and thank you for partnering with me in that. If you have your Bibles, let's look at Luke chapter 15. Now, when I was growing up, you'd have a guest speaker come in and do a gospel meeting, and our gospel meetings used to be 2 weeks, and then we've shortened them to 1 week, and now we do them Sunday through Wednesdays. But at some point during the gospel meeting, the guy would introduce Luke chapter 15, and night number 1, he would do the lost sheep. And night number 2, he'd do the lost coin. And then night number 3, he'd knock a home run and talk about the lost boy. Please understand that in Luke chapter 15, there's an introductory statement. And after that introductory statement, Jesus begins an unbroken dialogue that doesn't stop. Maybe at the end of our chapter in our English Bibles, maybe goes all the way through the end of the rich man and Lazarus. And it's a one unbroken thing where Jesus is talking about something. It's what I call a didactic triad. Didactic is teaching, and he's teaching with 3 stories. And he's going to and he does this several times in Scripture. Matthew 23, 24, and 25, he gives 3 examples of the end of the world. 2 of those are what ifs, and one of those is this is it. And the same thing's going to happen here. He's going to make some statements that oftentimes we preach and talk about in segments, but I want us to look at it, say, from a view of 10,000 feet. I think once in a while, and I'm as guilty as anybody, that because we're preachers, we pick a section of Scripture and we do a deep dive in that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you can't deep dive until you get the whole picture. There's a little story about 3 blind mice, and they take the 3 blind mice to see the elephant. And the first little mouse runs out on the elephant's trunk and says, I know what an elephant's like. He's like a snake. Second little blind mouse gets out on the elephant's big floppy ear. He says, I know what an elephant's like. The elephant's like a fan. Third little mouse runs into that elephant's big old leg and says, I know what the elephant is like. The elephant is like a tree. Now, they're all absolutely right, but they're all absolutely wrong, because the trunk, the ear, and the leg does not define the elephant, but the whole thing. And I think sometimes we get a piece of Scripture and we make it say something that we want it to say without looking at it in the big picture. So we're going to try to do a big picture look tonight and not deep dive, and I'll leave out some of the technicalities and things that you're familiar with, and we'll try to get a global look at this. Luke chapter 15. Then all the tax collectors and sinners drew near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So Jesus is surrounded by people, and he's eating. The Jews had some real hang-ups about who you could eat with. They weren't allowed to have Gentiles in their house. They couldn't break bread with Gentiles. Sociologically, if I sit down and eat with you on an intimacy scale, that's as close as I can get to you. The next step is touching you. That's why when we eat and have fellowship meals, that's a sociological thing. Well, if you eat with people, you're close to them. So Jesus is eating with people, and they're described as tax collectors and sinners. So you've got a special degree of sinner called a tax collector. So not only do you have sinners, but you have tax collectors. Now, if I were going to do that list, I would do tax collectors, sinners, and physical therapists, because those are some evil, evil people. But anyway, so the tax collectors were a part of the Jewish nation, and the reason they were so hated is because the Romans had this really good policy that when they took over and conquered territory, of course, they'd collect taxes from their subjects. Well, and the Romans basically spoke Latin, and in Palestine in the first century, they basically spoke Aramaic. Sometimes the Bible will talk about the Hebrew language. They're talking about the language of the Hebrews. And so you're the Roman tax collector, and you're speaking this language, and these people speak that language, and you walk up and you say, hey, your taxes is due, and what do you say? No habla. We run into that all the time working with the police. We got out one night, the officer will remain nameless, and we rolled some guys out of a car, 5 or 6 guys, and they didn't speak any English. He looked at me and said, I'm going to shoot the one in the red shoes. And they all looked down. They all spoke English. They just didn't want you to know they spoke English. Okay? So what I'm going to do if I'm the Roman government, I say, hey, you speak English. I want you to be the guy who goes around to all the English speakers and collect money from them. Cool. I'll do that. And by the way, I don't care how much money you collect. I need $20 from everybody in the room. But you could go to anybody in the room and say, hey, I'm going to need $60. Well, I'm not going to pay you $60. We see these 2 Roman soldiers. They say you are. Well, as long as I got my 20, I don't care how much you get. So you could extort people using the power of the Roman army and the power of the Roman enforcers. And basically you were seen as an extortionist. You were seen as somebody who was a traitor, and you were seen as somebody who was making your riches and your living off of your own people. Tax collectors were despised because they'd sold out to the Roman army. They'd sold out to the Roman officials. So Jesus is at this table, and he's surrounded by these guys who are tax collectors and sinners in general. And so when the Pharisees, a very elite, these guys had a criterion for righteousness that was basically self-selected. They had rabbinical traditions that said, if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's like we dot our I's and cross our T's, then you're not worthwhile. Some of these people were considered sinners, and they were absolutely sinners. And some of these people were considered sinners just because they didn't line up with the Pharisees. And then you had a group of guys called the scribes, and they were the people who were in charge of transferring the written law of Moses and making copies of it. And if you spent all your time copying the text, you should be an expert in the text. So these very elite religious people are looking at the people that are surrounding the Son of God, and they go, these people have no value. They looked at these people and said, they're worthless. I can't believe this guy surrounds himself with those kinds of people. And in response to that, he speaks these parables. So Jesus, hearing those thoughts, or hearing those words, or understanding those thoughts, confronts his audience. Verse 4, what man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which is lost until he find it? And when he finds it, or when it is found, he lays it on his shoulders rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. So he's asking a rhetorical question. This is not an outline of how we should find lost sheep. And I know we've taught that based on this verse. That's not what he's saying. He's asking this crowd of elite religious people, which one of you, if you had 100 sheep and you lost one, wouldn't leave these in the wilderness and go look for this one, and when you found it, you'd come home and have a party? This is not a dissertation on how to look for lost people. It's an indictment on their value system. This is the value you place on an animal. Which one of you, if you shot a big deer and you couldn't find him, wouldn't spend 2 or 3 days crawling around in the bushes looking for a blood trail? Would hire a dog to track your deer? Which one of you, if you lost your puppy, wouldn't put up a bunch of signs and put it on the light post or put it on Facebook? My brother and I came in from hunting one night, and we drove by this little white church, and underneath the white church I saw some movement, and I stopped and looked at, and a bunch of little kittens underneath this building. It's the old white church on Gurley Pike, where the Maysville church came from. And so I went back to the house and got a can of tuna, opened up the can of tuna, laid it out, and these little kittens came to me, and I snatched one of them. Took it to my daughter, gave her a little cat. She was very excited. My wife was not. Little calico-colored cat, named him Oxford, hanging out with the little kitten. Get up the next morning, we go hunting before daylight. I'm sitting in a tree about 8:30 in the morning. My phone starts to wiggle. I've told my wife and my daughter, unless something's on fire or somebody's bleeding, don't call me while I'm hunting. Well, my phone, a deer can hear that phone wiggle, by the way. So I hear that phone wiggle, I pull it out of my pocket. What? My daughter said, Dad, there's a sign at the end of the street says lost kitten, $300 reward. What should I do? I said, go catch all the other kittens. This lady had found these kittens, and instead of taking it to the county and registering them, she was just letting them be feral, and her daughter was walking across the pasture every day and feeding and watering the kittens, and she gets down there that morning, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, and she's missing a kitten. And signs go up everywhere. I value this cat at $300. That's the value we place on an animal. That's the value they placed on a sheep. Then he asked another rhetorical question. Or, so he's asked the guys, what man of you, or, verse 8, what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls her friends and her neighbors together, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the piece that I lost. Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So he asked the guys, this is an indictment. This is the value that you place on sheep. And then he talks to the ladies. You've got a lady, and she's got this treasure box. This is her wedding stuff. And she's got 10 silver coins, and she's going to lace them together, and she's going to wear it on the day that she gets married. You notice your teenage daughters plan their weddings before they're old enough to date? Lonnie Beth had her wedding all planned out and didn't even have a boyfriend. I said, what are you going to do, just plug some guy in, make him stand there? And sure enough, that's what Tyler did. Stand there, Tyler. Yeah, and it was a done deal. Well, she gets this thing out, and she's trying to see, and she's planning her wedding, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I know I had 10 of those, 1, 2, 3. And she tears the house apart. Now, this is not like our houses. There's no electric lights and there's no carpeted floor. This is probably a dirt floor. And she's sweeping that thing with a lamp and looking for it. And then when she finds it, she celebrates with her friends. I lost this very valuable thing. That's the value that we place on stuff. Dad, you ever lost the remote? What happens when Dad loses the remote? Dad will look all over the house for the remote. Eventually, Dad declares, someone has stolen the remote. Right? Yeah, a guy broke in under cover of darkness and left with the remote. Left the plasma TV, left the laptop, left the iPad, but stole that $6 remote from Walmart. Dad, you can just step across the room and change the channel all the laps you took looking for the remote. When I was a younger minister, I would pretend to sneeze and pretend to lose a contact lens that I don't wear and start looking for my contact. And did you know men in their Sunday suits will walk down an aisle and crawl in the floor looking for a contact lens in a Sunday morning service? Because that's the value we place on a contact lens. I saw the state championship basketball game get shut down when one of the players said, hey, ref, I blew my contact. And they shut the thing down and they look for that contact. What happens if you lose that cell phone? One little girl just grabbed her heart. Oh, no. What kind of mechanisms do we go through if we lose our cell phone, if we lose our contact lens, if we lose a key? Hey, which one of you, if you lost an animal, wouldn't shut the world down to go look for that lost animal? Which one of you, if you lost some piece of material, a coin, a contact lens, a cell phone, the remote control, upsets you to the point that you disrupt the house looking for this thing that you've lost? See, this is not telling people a model for how we look for the lost. It's an indictment. This is how you treat the things that are valuable to you. And a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. And so he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together. He journeyed to a far country, and there he wasted his possessions with prodigal living. The word prodigal means wasteful. So when you talk about the prodigal son, it means the wasteful son. It's not necessarily about a son who ran away. We use that word accommodatively when we do that. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and he joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. This is an arrogant, rebellious, and in the end, disgusting kid. Because he's living with the pigs, and he's willing to eat pig food to survive. And Jesus is painting a picture of somebody that you would not find attractive. Jesus is painting a picture of somebody who is, in our culture, he would have looked at his father and said, I wish you were dead, I want my inheritance. And it was probably okay in their culture for him to cash out because he's never going to be the guy who inherits the farm. The second-born son gets a third. The first-born son got 2/3 of the inheritance. So he's never going to be the guy, so give me my stuff, I'll leave. Well, he goes out and he takes the money that belonged to his father that now belongs to him, and he wastes it so bad that he ends up living with the pigs, an unclean animal in Jewish culture. And not only is the animal unclean, but what they eat is unclean, and he's willing to eat what they're eating. So you're talking about a vile, disgusting young man. Verse 17, but he came to himself. And he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and he came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him, had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Bring a ring for his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it. And let us eat and be merry, for this they began to be merry. Now, his older son was in the field. And he came and drew near to the house. And he heard music and he heard dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and because he had received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out to him and pleaded with him. And so he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this your son comes, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you kill the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and alive. He was lost and is found. So these people look at the crowd that Jesus is with, and they come to the conclusion that these people have no value. They're worthless. And Jesus said, well, you want to talk about value? Well, which one of you, if you had a lost animal, wouldn't go search for that animal? And when you found it, you'd have a celebration. And ladies, which one of you, if you lost something that was precious, you lost an earring or a diamond or your cell phone, you wouldn't take the house apart. And when you found it, you'd tell everybody you knew, hey, I lost this thing and I found it. And by the way, the guy had 2 sons. The sons ran away from home. He took his father's money and he wasted it, and he ended up living in a pig pen, willing to eat pig stuff. And then one day he had a revelation. He came to himself. He said to himself, you know, the slaves at my father's house have more to eat than this. I'll go home and just ask to be a slave. I'm not going to go home and ask for a job. I'm not going to go home and ask to be a son. I'm just going to go home and ask for a job. And so he starts back home, and his father sees him, which I think intimates the father's been looking at him. And he runs down the road to meet him, and he hugs him, and the son starts his speech. I'm not worthy to be your son. I've sinned. And the father says, bring me a robe, bring me a ring, and bring me shoes. Those are 3 signs of sonship. The servants don't wear shoes. The servants don't wear shirts. They don't wear robes. And when the father gives him this ring, it's essentially the debit card. You now have my ability to go make money transactions and put a piece of wax on a contract and mash my ring into it. You've spent your money, but I'm giving you more money to spend. And then they throw this celebration. There's a feast. There's music. There's dancing. It's celebrate. The older brother comes in, and I was in Cloverdale, Indiana, and I said, who was unhappy when the prodigal son came home? A little girl on the 4th row said, the fatted calf. Okay, besides him, who was unhappy? And see, the main character in this story is not the loving father. And the main character in this story is not the runaway boy. The main character in this story is the older brother. This is the value you place on an animal. This is the value you place on lost things. And this older brother represents the value that you place on lost people. And nobody's going to argue the fact the kid wasn't lost. He's selfish, he's greedy, he's arrogant, he's despicable. He lived with the pigs and ate what the pigs eat. But then he decided, what I need is my father. What I need is to be in my father's home. And so he comes home. And when he comes home, it's a celebration. Except for this arrogant, spiritually narcissistic, elite, judgmental brother who says he doesn't deserve being saved. I've been here the whole time. I've never transgressed again. Is that true? Can anybody in this room, except the kids in the toddlers class, say they've never transgressed the Father? What an arrogant attitude that I've always been here. I've never transgressed against you. And you wouldn't give me even a goat. And now your son, and now he invents history. Your son who's wasted your money with harlots. We know he wasted the money, but the Bible never tells us how. But that accusation, that negative fantasy, this is how I know you behave, and I know you're kind to people, I know what you're like. And the father says, you know, it's a good thing to celebrate when somebody who's lost comes home. In fact, when Jesus says, you know what, if you found this animal that you valued so much, you'd throw a party. And by the way, the angels in heaven celebrate the same way when a lost one comes home. And if you found this lost coin, you'd throw a party. And by the way, the angels in heaven celebrate the same way when this lost one comes home. And now you get this lost boy, and he comes home. And this is how the father feels about lost things. And this is how the older brother, who's perfect, feels about lost things. And folks, he's holding up a mirror and showing them their value system. And the reason we're not very evangelistic is we don't value those people. The reason we don't look for lost people like we look for lost animals and look for lost stuff is we just don't think they're as valuable as cats and dogs and puppies and deer and remote controls and contact lenses and bracelets and diamond rings and cell phones. So we spend an awful lot of our energy pursuing, looking for those things. Even when they're not lost, we spend an awful lot of time trying to acquire those things. And if we just spent half the energy, half the sleepless nights, trying to find the them rather than trying to find that, what would happen to the way we live? And I'm not sure, this is me thinking off the top of my head, not for the first time, but when a lost one comes home and they walk down the church aisle, that's uncomfortable. It's quiet and it's somber and it's like a funeral. And this was a party. There was a feast and there was music and there was dancing. And I'm not saying we need to change anything because we do things decently and in order. But when somebody started to step out of that aisle and come forward, if the ministers or the elders would run down the aisle and grab them. You ever walk down an aisle by yourself? It's bad enough to decide, you know what, my life's a wreck. And I'm living with the pigs and been eating with the pigs. And I need my dad. I need my father. And step out of the aisle. And the preacher looks and everybody else looks. I remember when Matt Venable's little brother was baptized. His grandfather walked down the aisle with him. I don't know why I remember that, but I remember that. Because this little boy had decided, I'm going to be baptized, but his grandfather came down the aisle with him holding his hand. I'll never forget that as a young minister. What's the value you place on those people? See, these three stories, the first two are indictments. They're not a model for, the things lost outside the house, things lost inside the house. And I guess that's a valid way to look at that chapter. We look for the lost outside, we look for the lost inside the church. But that's not really what that was written about. Jesus says this is an indictment. This is the value you place on animals. This is the value you place on material things. And the older brother is a projection of you. It's a transference. You should see yourself in this older brother because you're spiritually narcissistic and your value system, this is how you value sheep, this is how you value stuff. But this lost kid comes home and you're mad because you don't have a party too? Wow. Now, the correlation or the collateral lessons are, hey, how does the father feel about lost things? Now, if this is how the father sees lost things, and this is how the older brother sees lost things, and those two things are different, who's really at odds with the father? The kid who ran away or the kid who's never left home? Your father says, this is how I feel about lost things. And if I don't feel about lost things the same way my father does, I'm at odds with my father. And it doesn't matter how many things I've not transgressed. If I don't share my father's value system, I'm as lost and far away from home as the kid who ran away and ate with the pigs. And I heard Kurt Cloninger say, you got somebody who ran away from home and they smoke weed or they're addicted to alcohol or their girlfriend's going to have a baby and they're not married, and you've never run away from home and you've never smoked weed and you've not addicted to alcohol, and your girlfriend and you didn't have sex until you were married, and you think you're better than that person that did, you're just as lost as they are. You don't understand the value system that your father wanted you to inherit. Jesus tells this story, and the first story convicts them that this is how you feel about animals. And the second story is a conviction. This is how you feel about things. And then the third story is you have to see yourself as this older brother. And if your attitude toward lost things is opposite or not the same as your father's, and you're just as lost as a kid who ran away from home. And then the other lesson about this is, if you're that lost kid, if you wake up one day and realize, there's some things in my life that are a dumpster fire. I've got attitudes, I've got hobbies, I've got habits, I've got friendships. I do things, I say things, I don't do things, and I don't say things that I should. If you look at your life and you come to the conclusion that I'm not in a good relationship with my father, there's no need to hide and be ashamed of it. Your father says, come home, I'll make you a son again. Because the only thing worse than having somebody who's religious tell you you don't have any value is for you to think I don't have any value, and that God will never love me, God would never accept me, God would never take me home. And that's the biggest lie Satan ever told. If you go back to the Garden of Eden, you have Adam and Eve, and there's that verse that says, and they were naked, and there was no shame. That makes the teenagers uncomfortable. It's not about that. They're living in a place where they are not self-conscious. They don't compare themselves with God. They don't compare themselves with each other. They are innocents. And God knew they could sin. Not only did God create us with the capacity for sin, because He gave us the free will, He gave us the capacity for imperfection. Before the foundation of the world, He prepared Christ to come to fix the problem. So when we sinned, the wheels didn't come off the thing. Christ's coming is not plan B. Christ coming to the earth always been plan A, because we were imperfect. But what happened when Adam and Eve sinned is shame entered the world. And they hid from each other. And in one of the saddest verses in the Bible, they hid from God. God's walking in the cool of the day and says, Adam, where are you? Adam said, I hid. And he said, why'd you hide? I was afraid. It's not sin that disrupted creation as much as shame. Barry talked about my grandchildren. My grandson Gunnar, who turned 15 days ago, is like his dad. He's quiet, he's careful, he's timid, he wants to see it done, he wants to try it halfway, and then he'll do it. My granddaughter Rowan, who turned 6 today, believes she gets up certain days and gravity's been turned off, and she'll try anything. She's just like her mother. I think God saw her mom and said, that was so much fun, we'll make one just like her. And Lonnie Beth is paying for her raise, and that little girl is off the chain. And she'll come to my house this weekend, and I'll say, Rowan, don't climb on that, because if you climb on that and you fall and you cut your knee, you'll get hurt. Well, guess what she'll do? You'll climb on that. And she'll fall, and she'll cut her knee. And when she falls and cuts her knee, you know what she does? She runs to me. But when Adam and Eve sinned, they ran from God. And they hid from each other. And when we find ourselves as that lost child, we hide from each other. I want you to know we're struggling, and then we think we're hiding from God. And that's the last thing we should do. You wake up in the pig pen and realize the pig pen is not my Father's house. And if I could just get out of the pig pen and get to my Father's house, it will all be okay. And so instead of hiding from each other and trying to hide from God, we need to take ownership. And as soon as I recognize that I'm one of the sinners Jesus came to save, it's not very hard to interact with the other sinners Jesus came to save. But if we ever have that attitude that us versus them, that there's a group of people that are in and a group of people that are out, we'll stand around like those narcissistic Pharisees and go, those people don't have any value. And then we mirror that older brother. And we look at God and say, we've never done anything wrong. We were raised in the church. What does that mean? You slept in the pew and bathed in the baptistry? No. We were lucky enough to be exposed to the loving care of the Father before we ended up in a pig pen. But don't get me wrong, all of us have sinned in the Father's house. And once I recognize that I'm the sinner that Jesus came to save, then it's probably easier for me to interact with the sinners that Jesus came to save. So you find yourself in one of two places tonight. You find yourself either as that person who doesn't evangelize because you don't think those people have any value, and we spend our time in pursuit of this, in our pursuit of that, and we're not pursuing them. We find ourselves in an arrogant position where when people do come back, we treat them as second-class citizens. And there's no tears in heaven. That's T-E-A-R-S and that's T-I-E-R-S. There's no tears in heaven. We're all children of God, joint heirs with Christ. And so we find ourselves either mirroring that group of Pharisees and scribes, that older brother, or we find ourselves as that lost boy who wrecked his life and came to the realization that the only thing that can fix this problem is I got to get home to my Father. And give any speech you want to give. Write anything you want to write on your card. But you know what the Father says? Give him a robe, give him a ring, and give him shoes. Give him a son. And although we will do things decently and in order, there will be a party in heaven. Because the angels of God rejoice. Because they watched the Son of God leave the presence of the Father and be murdered on a cross so that we could come home. And every time one of us comes home, that sacrifice was not in vain. That sacrifice was not wasted. And that makes us valuable because the thing that paid for us was the blood of the Son of God. You either have the same value your father has about lost things, or you have the value that the older brother had about lost things, or you may be a lost thing. And in any case, we love you not to be lost anymore. We love you for the Father to be able to run and meet you and for the angels to have a reason to celebrate tonight. If we can offer you the Lord's invitation, change your perspective on evangelism, but make sure you understand that lost boys come home. God will welcome you with open arms. If we can assist you with study, pray with you, or baptize you, we want the lost to come home tonight. Let us celebrate while we stand, while we sing.